I'm going to name this a segment, and it's going to be kind of a little game that we're going to play. The game is called Legit Concern or No Biggie. And we're going to talk about some of the things that happened during the preseason game. We're going to talk about maybe some concerns that people have surrounding the entire team, and it'll be up to you to answer legit concern or no biggie. And you have to say it like that. This is a game show. I'm going to be a stickler. This is like Jeopardy rules. You have to answer in the form of a question, except answer in the form of what I just said. Fair? Understood?
Fair.
Got it. Loud and clear.
All right. We talked about a little bit in the first segment with this, but we talked the offensive line depth. Obviously did not have a very good game, but at the same time, the Lions, top 7 guys are set with your starters, and Graham Glasgow and Halapuli Vaitai as your 6th, your 5th and your 6th. Colby Sorsdal is your 7. There's got to be an 8th out there somewhere. It's probably going to be a tackle, and then maybe a 9th. So out of that group, we haven't seen really anyone establish themselves. So is the offensive line depth a legit concern or no biggie? Miko, go first.
I'm going to say no biggie.
Okay.
Because I think listen, I get it. It looks really bad, especially like we talked about in the first segment. The interior of the offensive line does look like it has some holes there, but one of the biggest pieces that could be there as far as an internal chess piece that can kind of bounce back and forth between a couple positions is the potential of Graham potentially not winning this starting job. And so if you have Graham as your next man up on the interior, he kind of covers 3 potential spots on the interior of the offensive line for you. And then when you start to look at the tackle positions, I had my original concern after the Giants game because Matt Nelson absolutely looked terrible. I do feel better about Jermaine Ifedi playing potentially left or right tackle. Through the 2 preseason games that they've had, he's actually looked pretty well at both of those positions. So I'm going to kind of back off how serious I think this issue is. I do think it's a problem, but I don't think it's a big one that some fans are kind of making it out to be.
Ryan?
I think there's room for concern. And I say that just because of what I said in the earlier segment. You trade out Evan Brown for Graham Glasgow, and that's good. I think a lot of people can see that as a viable upgrade. I just look at the OT3 spot, and I have questions. I have big time question marks, and I just want to remind everybody of what football looked like on Thanksgiving last year when the Lions were down to Dan Skipper and Coyote Awosika, both playing guard for that team. It was a problem. It was troublesome, and it's something that can legitimately blow up your offense. And I think the Lions are in a great spot. They have Graham, but beyond that, there's question marks. So I think there's definitely reason to be concerned that the guy that will be there come next week might not be in Detroit right now.
Yeah, I think I fall a little bit towards no biggie. And the only reason I say that is because beyond Graham, there's other movable parts here, right? And we haven't seen Vaitai do it at all this offseason, but if a tackle goes down, I think the best combination is sliding whoever's not injured to left tackle and sliding Vaitai to right tackle, and then Graham fills right guard. I think that is a very doable way in which you're not taking a huge step down. Interior offensive line is a little bit more of a concern, but again, you have Graham that can fill multiple positions. And so unless we're talking multiple guys along the offensive front get injured, which happens every now and then, that would be bad, but that is bad for 32 teams. And we mentioned it before already. There's just not a lot of depth out there. So it's an issue, but it's an issue for every team. If the starters go down, it's an issue for every team. And the only reason it would maybe impact the Lions more so than other teams is that their offense goes because of the offensive line. And that's mostly true for a lot of teams, but I think it's even more so for the Lions, a team that is so dependent on the run, a team that likes to use the athleticism of their offensive linemen to scheme up plays, right? You throw a bunch of wide receiver screens because Panay can run out there and blow up a corner. And so if you lose one of those guys, it's going to hurt a little bit more maybe than the average team. But at the same time, there's nothing you can do about it. There's only so many good offensive linemen out there. and at least you're, one backup deep, I think, at every position right now where you can feel at least okay at.
Yeah, it's a really good point about this team's identity and offensively what they do, what they accomplish on the field has a lot to do with the offensive line. And what was it you, Jeremy, who mentioned that Ben Johnson gives the offensive lineman I like these plays.
Right? That was in the Ringer piece by Ben Solak. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this team, they live and die by it. So yeah.
All right. Next concern, wide receiver depth. So again, we know who the top 4 are: Marvin Jones, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Khalif Raymond, Josh Reynolds are your top 4. We're not talking J-Mo yet because he's not going to be on the team to start the season. But wide receiver 5, and if there's a wide receiver 6 spot, is suddenly wide open after, I would say, a disappointing game, mostly across the board at the wide receiver position. Dylan Drummond takes a step back. Chase Cota had a good punt return, had the only touchdown, but only had 2 catches for 9 yards. Maurice Alexander goes missing. Who am I missing? Trinity Benson misses a catch. Denzel Mims is off the team. So how concerned are you guys about the lack of a wide receiver 5, 6 standout so far in training camp? And maybe are you concerned maybe even with the top 4 right now? This time we'll go with Ryan first.
I feel pretty good about the top 4. And, I really like the way that Khalif Raymond has played, man. Like, what a training camp that guy's had, and he gets rewarded with that contract extension. I think having him as Amon-Ra insurance is great. There's just so many other pass catchers on this team. You know what I mean? Like, I get it. You want to have the wide receiver depth, but for all intents and purposes, you got to account for Sam Laporta. You got to account for Jahmyr Gibbs. You got to account for David Montgomery. These guys are going to be fixtures of the offense as well. So it's not a matter of, hey, can we get guys out there who, can run routes and catch passes necessarily. It's like, can we get football players in here who will show up and do their job? And hey, if they're not getting the ball thrown their way, they're in there and they're making a play for somebody else, right? Like, if the Lions get down to the point where they're relying on Chase Cota to step up and be a big part of this team, I'm wondering what fever dream I'm waking up from in a nervous sweat. So
what? I'm going to stick your feet to the fire. What's the official answer here?
It's a bit concerning.
Miko, what are your thoughts? Technically, the legit concern or no biggie.
As a teacher, Ryan, I would expect you to be able to follow the rules that were laid out ahead of time.
I was too busy focused on the wine. I wanted to get the wine down right.
Yeah, so for me, this is a legit concern for me, and it's been a legit concern even before training camp, before we even knew who was actually going to be vying for wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6. And it's because for some of the same reasons that we talked about with offensive line, where it's the wide receiver spot, it just feels like there's going to be someone who struggles with something, right? Josh Reynolds, I think, has had an injury the last couple years where it's definitely banged him up for a couple games. And even if he's out there, he's not playing at the same speed as he normally does. And while Khalif has been an Ironman, while Amon-Ra has been, fairly reliable, he obviously had the ankle injury last year. I still have questions about whether or not Marvin Jones and Jared Goff, if their game syncs up well. And that can obviously be easily put to bed by them just going out there and playing together and putting it on tape. But as of right now, we all know Marvin to be deep threat, contested catch kind of guy. And Jared Goff doesn't excel and doesn't really like throwing those types of passes. It's just not something that he's usually very comfortable with. So then that's when you start going down the list. And Ryan, you kind of mentioned this in the first segment. You quickly get to a bunch of UDFAs and guys who just haven't done it at the NFL level. And that's where my concern comes in, where sure, if one of those guys goes down, then maybe you don't have to, yes, you can still have Sam Laporta, you'll still have Jahmyr Gibbs, you'll still have David Montgomery, but these other guys, Dylan Drummond, Chase Cota, they just haven't done it at the NFL level. And even, looking at this last preseason game, these guys let some easy passes kind of slip through their fingers. And so you start to wonder, okay, can we count on these players if it comes down to a crunch time situation where you need Jared Goff to not just hand the ball off, but you need him to make timely throws, and you need him to throw to guys that are actually going to make plays. That's where my concern kind of starts to creep up a little bit.
I'm a little more on the no biggie side, and
No biggie.
but I like how you've done a little like old timey Jersey boy thing to it. But I think I'm going to come off a little bit like a Dylan Drummond truther here, and maybe it's because maybe this is like in counteraction to people who have come wildly obsessed with Chase Cota because he caught a 1-yard touchdown pass in which there wasn't a defender within 5 yards of him and had an okay punt return. When the punt return job isn't even open, so who cares? But like Dylan Drummond has been outstanding in training camp. Like not just good, outstanding. And you listen to the way that the coaching staff talks about him. You listen to the way that Jared Goff talks about him. He does everything right. He works so hard. And it's not lip service either, because guess who's out there on the jugs machine with like the hardest working players on the team? It's Dylan Drummond. And so like I almost view him as kind of like the Jerry Jacobs of the offense right now, where like he's putting in the work, he's doing everything right, and yes, he dropped a couple of passes. Yes, you want your workout warriors to perform on Sundays. I understand all of that. But you're looking at like a very small sample size of his work, and you're making sweeping conclusions about the guy. I've been watching him all summer, man, and I think I'm okay with him being wide receiver 5. I think he's going to win that job, and that's fine. Like that, having that as your 5, it's not. Is it the best wide receiving core in the league? No. Are you a little bit concerned because last year when the receiving core hit injuries, everything seemed to go off the rails? Yeah, you are a little bit, but you also have Ben Johnson. You also have, like Ryan mentioned, a bunch of other weapons that you can feel pretty good about. I'm not that worried. All right. I think I'm going to have to skip a couple here because we're having good conversations here, but it's taking a long time. Backup quarterback. As we mentioned at the top, not the shiniest debut for Teddy Bridgewater. Everyone is sick of Nate Sudfeld, it seems like, at this point. My question isn't just, are you concerned about the Lions' backup quarterback, but are you concerned about it for week 1? Are you concerned about it at the very beginning of the season? Are you concerned that maybe Teddy Bridgewater won't have enough reps under him to be a serviceable backup if he needs to be an Arrowhead? Because he's clearly going to be the backup. I think we all clearly agree that's going to happen. That's going to happen. So, you know, we're already starting to have conversations. Maybe they keep Sudfeld as a quarterback 3 because Bridgewater might not be ready, because they need a veteran who's been in the system for a year. Do you share any of that concern? Is Teddy Bridgewater not being ready for week 1 backup duties a legit concern, or meh, no biggie? Miko.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back with meh, no biggie on this one, because I think when to evaluate Teddy and to come away with any type of sweeping conclusion that like he's not up to snuff or that he doesn't have the ability is to drastically overlook how poorly this offensive line played. Like Teddy barely got an opportunity to scan the field, let alone, actually deliver like, catchable passes. So I think even if it were going into week 1, I think the Lions could have a good enough game plan in place for Teddy to excel. And again, we talked about it just a little while ago. This team leans heavily on their offensive line, and they lean very heavily on their run game. So even before we get to like, hey, Teddy needs to be the savior if he were to have to play in week 1 or play early in the season, we have to realize that the run game is going to be the most important element of this offense. And that getting going first is going to be the thing that makes Teddy's job and Jared Goff's job, or potentially a Nate Sudfeld, God help us all. Like the run game and the offensive line is going to be the thing that like kind of keeps us afloat as a team.
Ryan?
It's no biggie. I'm not concerned about it at all whatsoever. I was really glad that I went to joint practices last week against Jacksonville for this very reason. That first day that Teddy was out there on Wednesday, you could see that he was just doing a lot of like miming and going through the motions and kind of getting caught up to speed and
mental reps.
It was a lot of mental reps, right? That next day, after seeing him constantly having, his helmet up, he's listening to the, play calls and everything. The next day, he's already repping ahead of Sudfeld, right? And like certain, like in 7-on-7, like, some of the team stuff, he's just being brought along slowly. And I think this week they'll probably just be able to give him a lot more. And the guys are professional. Like,
Yeah.
it's crazy to think about this, but like, this is year 10, right? Like, Bridgewater has been around the block. He knows what it's going to take to get ready, and I don't have any concern about it.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. Meh. No biggie. I do think there's a legit possibility that they keep a third quarterback. We know that they proposed the emergency quarterback rule, which means they would have to keep a third quarterback if they want to utilize that rule. And maybe it is, maybe they would rather start Nate Sudfeld week 1 if an emergency happens. But Teddy's going to be fine. He's a pro. He knows offensive schemes. He just needs to learn verbiage, and that won't take that long. Next on the topic, we're going to save GMO to close out the segment. So before that, pretty significant news, and we alluded to it at the top. Savion Smith and Ifeatu Melifonwu suffer injuries in this game. We don't know how serious, but Dan Campbell said it seems like it might be a long shot to play this week against Carolina. So that was kind of their primary safety depth. Like, you still obviously have Tracy Walker, who appears to be coming off the bench behind Kirby Joseph and CJGJ, but then it was Savion, then it was Iffy. Maybe those two are swapped or whatever. So now, is the lack of safety depth beyond those three a legit concern? Or is it meh, no biggie? Ryan.
I'm just going to say, no biggie, because Brian Branch exists. You know what I mean? Like, Will Harris exists. Like, I think that those are two guys that obviously they really trust Brian, if he's going to be out there and playing the slot from the jump. Like, I think that they probably really trust that guy if they need to move him around. I think they really trust Will Harris. This is a team that, has prioritized getting players who can play multiple positions, and they have guys in the secondary who can do that. And I think the biggest thing, though, Jeremy, is like you said, Tracy Walker is kind of viewed as depth right now. So, it seems like a pretty solid security blanket to have, at least. A guy like Tracy Walker, who we've seen play at a pretty high level. It's just whether or not the Achilles has truly affected him. But I don't know. I don't think it's not a big deal.
Miko?
Yeah, I'm gonna side with Ryan on this one. I don't think it's a big deal for the Lions specifically. If we're talking about like their collective defense and them having depth, I don't think it's a big deal because, like you said, they do have Tracy Walker, and I think if things really came push to shove, like you have Will Harris or you have Brian Branch, where you could probably swap one of those guys to play a safety spot for you for a couple games or potentially for the entire season if it really came down to it. I will say, though, it might be a legit concern if you're iffy, because it's getting to the point where, some players get hurt playing football, and then it seems like other players, like football is just like consistently hurting you. Like that's what it seems like with Effie, is that he doesn't seem to be able to play the position or play the game that he loves without getting hurt. And so that's where there should be some concern. But as far as the team itself, nah.
Yeah, I think the only issue that this immediately raises is some special teams issues, because I thought both Savion and Iffy were making some big strides there, and they're going to have to find contributors there. Maybe at other positions, maybe a guy like Brandon Josephs does make the roster, but I think you're right. Like, I think they're in an okay spot when it comes to their safety depth in terms of players that could actually come in there and play. And half the reason why they love getting all these guys that are so versatile is for this reason. You can get hit hard in one position and still weather the storm. And so I think you guys are on point there. Let's do it, though. Let's talk about Jameson Williams. Obviously, gets injured last week. We haven't had a podcast since that. It doesn't seem like he's going to play in the rest of the preseason, which means we've basically seen all we're going to see of him until 3 weeks into the season when he's allowed back in the facility. So we've gotten to this point at Jameson Williams' career, issue after issue, thing after thing. Legit concern with Jameson Williams, or no biggie. And Ryan, we've done like little check-ins every now and then with like 1 to 10, how concerned are we about JMO? So I'm going to there's a second question in there too. On a scale of 1 to 10, how biggie is this? I think it's Miko's turn to go first.
I guess I'm going to probably maybe disappoint you both, but like this is still a meh, no biggie for me. And it's mainly because like my level of concern about JMO throughout this entire process, throughout the suspension, throughout the first hamstring injury, and throughout this hamstring injury, hasn't been like a level of concern about like him or even his career, there's disappointment for sure. Obviously, like a lot of fans, I want to see him on the field. I want to see, the investment that Brad Holmes has made as far as, getting that, home run threat for the Lions. But these things, I don't know how to make them a big deal necessarily. I don't know how to take them as like something that's detrimental to his career. Yes, there's setbacks. There's things that are definitely hard keeping him from being on the field as soon as we'd like him to be. But I still view these things as just small incidents that are just kind of just like, yeah, they're nagging, they're annoying, but I don't think it's a bigger like mark on him or his career to this point.
Ryan, you've been optimistic about JMO in the past. I think last time we did this, you were like a 1.5 or a 2, right?
Yeah, I was down there. Did Miko give a score between 1 and 10?
Oh, then I'm a 1 all day.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, if this was on like a 3 rapper scale and it was like Big Sean is like no concern, and then you have Big Boy from Outkast in the middle, that'd be like medium concern, and then like Notorious B.I.G.'s at like the I mean that's a biggie. Okay. I'm like between Big Boy and Biggie Smalls right now. Like I'm maybe like Big Pun. I don't know.
I was gonna say like Fat Joe.
Yeah.
So like a 7.5?
Yeah, I'm like a 7.5, maybe like a light 8.
Wow.
I think the concern now is that it is impacting his ability to play football. You know what I mean? I feel like the things that didn't concern me, the things I thought were no biggie, were lighting fireworks and hanging out with friends late at night and being, a young person in their 20s. Well, the football's starting to be impacted, the running a route and pulling your hamstring and a soft tissue injury that is keeping you off the field for more time. It's starting to impact that phase of his life, which is the phase that the Lions have him on the roster for, is playing football. Well, now the football is being impacted. So that's why I just have to be pretty concerned about it, because Jeremy, like, could he really afford to miss any reps for a guy that they were playing for basically, the majority of preseason week 1?
No, you can't afford. Like, and I'm not at a 7.5 or an 8, but I'm probably at a 5.5 or a 6. And the reason for it is the same as you. It's football reasons. He did not look polished at all during all of training camp. During the first preseason game, he looked rough around the edges. Looked like the route crispness was not there. The mental side of it, in terms of getting on the same page with your quarterbacks, he's potentially running the routes or wrong routes, or the quarterback is throwing the wrong routes. Like, it just did not look like it was there. If he went out and just like dominated that first preseason game and tore apart the Giants' second and third string secondary, I think everyone would be sitting here a lot easier and would probably not be freaking out right now, because he's in a good spot. He's getting better. He's clearly showing the talent that he has. It's not just like these one bomb every 5 practices type of performance. So to me, it's the football stuff that really, injuries happen. So it's a bummer that he's going to miss 2 weeks, but is 2 weeks going to make this guy's career? 2 weeks of practice and training camp? No. But the fact that he hasn't shown us anything in practice, in games, or when he shows it's so infrequently, tells me that this guy still has a long way to go in development, and now he's going to miss the next 2 months, which is not good. It's bad.
And did the Lions get any clarification on whether or not he can actually rehab at the team's facilities?
I assume the answer is no. Like, he has to stay away from the team facilities. So like they are going to have to set up something for him, or just assume, like, hope that he goes to an independent doctor, I would imagine.
That seems like a good idea.
But here's the thing I will say that doesn't, like, I'm not concerned about the kid's work ethic. I'm not concerned about the kid not caring about football. I'm not worried about the people that he hangs out with, any of that stuff. It's just purely football, and he's just not there.
Yeah. Best ability.
Availability.
Thank you.
I guess that's where, like, why I don't have a ton of concern, because I get it. Like, the stuff that's happening on the football field, like him pulling a hamstring in training camp, I just said like a while ago or a minute ago that I was concerned about it with Iffy, because Iffy, like, doing his job, which is to tackle people, gets him hurt. I'm not as concerned because like as a former sprinter, as somebody who ran track in high school, like these things just happen freakishly, right? You did
Sure.
all the right things, you stretched, you hydrated, and for some reason or another, like you just came out of your blocks wrong, and next thing you know, you pull something. That's not so like for me, that's not a knock on you. That's just a freak thing that kind of happens. And Jeremy, to the point about like maybe his routes not being there, I at least saw like a little bit of growth in that Giants game because a lot of those catches that he made were in short, tight corners where
Sure.
he has to make like sharp cuts out of those routes. And so it's the little steps, but I get what you mean in the sense of that we're not seeing domination yet at this level for JMO. And I think that's the thing that kind of gets people kind of like pulling on the reins a bit, where it's just like, I don't know what to really expect when we're not seeing it consistently. And now that he's going to be out for an additional amount of time, it just prolongs that entire process for him.
Yeah.